So I'm going to give you a kind of an update of what's going on at the site from a strategic planning and budgeting point of view. I've got great news. I'm sure most of you have heard. Congress passed our budget for the DOE, and for the first time in 21 years, we have a budget to start October 1st. So you have no idea how much easier that makes our life at the site, knowing how much budget we're going to have at the beginning of a fiscal year. You know, in previous fiscal years, we've always had to kind of put the brakes on spending and getting work done because we didn't know where we were going to end up. You know, we knew it was in our president's budget request, but we had no idea what we were going to end up with. So it's a great thing for the site. We didn't get everything we requested. Our president's budget request was reduced by $105 million, but we're still getting $80 million more than what we got in fiscal year 18. What's helping offset some of the impacts of the $105 million decrease is that, you know, as a result, in fiscal year 18, when you're under a continuing resolution, we didn't know what our final budget was until March. And so, like I talked earlier, is that, you know, you're always putting the brakes on how much you're going to spend because you never know what you're going to get. Well, finally, when you get your budget in March, there's really no way you can spend everything that they gave you. So we have additional carryover from fiscal year 18 going into fiscal year 19. So that will help offset some of the decreases to our that we got in our 19 budget. So a couple things I want to point out as far as the budget goes. We have a new line item project in the budget for the Argus system. We've been working on Argus for H area for the past couple years now, and it was always funded under operating funds. And we still need to continue H, but then we need to install Argus at K, L, and SRNL. And so Congress decided to make that into a line item project. It's a little bit more administrative work for us to do it as a line item versus doing it under operating. But the good news is it's a high visibility now that it's a line item project. So that's really good news. We got another line item project approved in fiscal year 19, and that was our Emergency Operations Center. And I don't know if any of you have ever had a tour of the site and got a chance to tour our Emergency Operations Center, but if you did, it would be a memorable experience for you because it's in the basement of our DOE's old admin facility, and it's a very old, dark, moldy facility, and I tell you, I take my hat off to the people that got to work there every day. So DOE or Congress has approved a line item project starting in fiscal year 19 to begin work replacing that Emergency Operations Center. So we're still very, very preliminary in the planning for that. We are still doing conceptual design. The plan is right now is to build a new Emergency Operations Center in E area, which is there in the parking lot next to SRNL. And so we look forward to that project progressing and getting a new Emergency Operations Center. It'll take several years for us to get through design and construction of that facility. But the important thing is that Congress has recognized the need, and we are going to begin construction on a new line item project. Another line item that was approved in fiscal year 19 was SDU's salt disposal units 8 and 9. In the past, we've always done salt disposal units as individual projects. SDU 7 is now complete, and so now we've combined 2 of the SDUs as one project, SDU 8 and 9. There should be a lot of economies of scale of building 2 at the same time versus 1. And Congress approved that line item in fiscal year as well. So fiscal year 19, we have 3 new line items approved for the site. We didn't get quite what we wanted for SDU 8 and 9. We requested it was almost $40 million, and they gave us 7.5. But with the delays that are happening for SWPF, we believe that it's not going to be an impact to our overall schedule with pushing out SDUs 8 and 9 construction. Another point of interest for the community is in the President's budget request there was no PILT. PILT is payment in lieu of taxes, and there's about $6.5 million that the site pays to Aiken, Barnwell, and Allendale counties. So we don't pay real estate taxes, but we pay what they call payment in lieu of taxes. And Barnwell is the biggest recipient of that, and it was not included in the President's budget in 19. However, Congress, when they passed the budget, did restore the PILT payments to the communities. That would have been devastating for Barnwell. I mean, $4.5 million of the $6.5 goes to Barnwell, and you know, as you all know, Barnwell is not a very wealthy county, and that would have been a pretty dramatic cut to their schools and their services. So we're very thankful that Congress restored the funding for PILT. And hopefully when we submit our budget for fiscal year 20, there won't be any issues. But there was a lot of meetings and a lot of conversations in headquarters and with Congress about funding PILT. So I'm glad to see that that took place. So a lot of good news. We got another change for our budget is cybersecurity. Cybersecurity used to be paid for out of our indirects, and now because of everybody knows what's going on with cybersecurity across the world, that is now directly funded and is part of our security budget. So we didn't get all we wanted for our cybersecurity budget, but we got enough money for in fiscal year 19 to get a good start on implementing the requirements that we need at the site for cybersecurity. So there was $65 million that was taken from the liquid waste operations budget and restored back into the SWPF line item. As most of you know, the SWPF was supposed to start up in December of 2018. We have missed that milestone for a number of reasons, and so we needed Congress to restore some of the funding for the line item project in fiscal year 19. So they took $65 million out of our liquid waste budget, which was going to be used for operating SWPF had it started, and just moved that to the construction line item. So that's good, and that's going to keep that project moving forward. Then there were some other impacts to our risk management operations. It was cut $27 million. That's going to impact our nuclear materials mission by delaying some LEU downblending operations and the inability to increase spent nuclear fuel dissolution batches in H Canyon. So there will be some impacts to our nuclear materials program. As we go through the fiscal year, we're going to try to offset those impacts, but right now we are looking at that $27 million primarily hitting our nuclear materials program. We have an A-area firewater project that we're doing as part of risk management operations, and some of that reduction, that $27 million reduction, is reducing the amount of management reserve that's set aside for that project. Management reserve is set aside for a construction project to take care of the unknowns that happen in that project. So if we run into some realized risks on that project and we don't have the funding to pay for that, then most likely that area firewater project would push out into fiscal year 20 until new money was available. So but that took place with the 19 budget. Like I said, it's a whole different world out there at the site as far as hiring, starting projects, continuing projects when you know you have a budget starting October 1st. It's a whole different mindset that a lot of us haven't worked in that environment for many, many years. So hats off to Congress for passing a bill on time. Hopefully, fiscal year 20 will go as smooth as what 19 did, but that's a good thing. For fiscal year 20, the site has submitted. And I can't give you any details on 20 because it's all embargoed until next February when the president releases his budget. But The site has been given a target, and we have prepared what scope we can do within that target. We've submitted that to headquarters. They are in the process of pulling all that information together, and they will submit that to OMB as far as EM's proposal for fiscal year 20. We expect sometime in the after Thanksgiving and between Christmas, we'll get what they call the OMB passback. OMB will give a target back to EM and say, this is, thank you for your information you gave us, but here's the target that we want you to give. New site targets will go out to the sites. We will develop our impacts and scopes of work, and then that will be the basis of the President's budget that comes out in February of next year for fiscal year 20. So a lot of work being going on right now in the fiscal year 20 budget process. Life cycle estimate. So every year we go through and update the what we call the integrated life cycle estimate for the site, and that is the cost, scope, schedule, and budget to complete EM's mission at the site. Currently, our mission is scheduled to end in 2065. The total cost of completing EM's mission is about $70 billion. So we've got a lot of work in front of us to complete EM's mission. So every year we go through an update of that. That update has been approved by the site. We have what we call a change control board, and each assistant manager for the site for each PBS presents their changes that they made from the previous fiscal year. That's brought to a change control board, and it's voted on and approved by the change control board and that becomes the site's approved life cycle estimate. So then what happens after that? Every year KPMG comes in and audits that. So there's a requirement by Congress for DOE to provide what their environmental liability is. So they come in and they audit our life cycle estimate and review changes from last year to this year, and then they issue an audit report to Congress on the changes that have happened through the life cycle. We are right in the midst of that right now. Good news is we're not hearing anything from the auditors that they have identified any findings with the life cycle estimate. So that's a good thing. The good news is that this year's update there were really no scope changes from last year to this year. We did move some scope out because of funding cuts that we received, but there were no real scope changes between last year's update and this year's updates. So that brings me to that next subject as far as strategic planning. Ann White, who's the new EM1, his initiative in place right now to put together a 10-year strategic plan. And we've talked about this before, that EM has not published a strategic plan in a long time. And so Ann White has put together a team to review a couple different scenarios. We are working on those scenarios right now. The first scenario is what could you realistically get done in the next 10 years? And so we have a number of things that we can do. First thing is we could accelerate the liquid waste program and get those tanks cleaned and the glass made and the salt produced and close that area. We could do that quicker than what our current baseline says. All we need is funding. We need additional funding. The technology's there. We just need additional funding to do it. The second thing is we have a number of buildings on site that could be accelerated for D&D. So we have put together a proposal to, as part of this strategic plan, to accelerate several buildings that we have here on site. We spend millions of dollars a year doing surveillance and maintenance on facilities that are just sitting there waiting for D&D. And the only holdup for doing that is funding. So if we had additional funding, we would be able to accelerate work and reduce our overall life cycle by completing those buildings. So we're in the process of pulling together this scenario for Ann White. So that was kind of our realistic case, and then we had a pie in the sky scenario. You know, if money wasn't an object, what could you do? Okay, and so we've put together a number of scenarios for that. Made some, you know, overreaching assumptions like, you know, NNSA taking over as the landlord of the site, and you know, WIP being able to accept, you know, all the material that we can send them, and a repository opening at a date sooner than what was planned. So that's kind of a pie in the sky type plan that or scenario that we've put together for Ann. But the good news is that she wants to get a more of a closure mentality to the EM mission. Right now, everybody's getting, you know, we're getting $7 billion, and that's being distributed out to all the EM sites. But each site is making a little bit of progress with the money that they're given, but we're not making any, you know, big landscape changes, you know, across, you know, that we can go to Congress and say, look, you gave us $7 billion and this is what we got for it. So Ann's trying to change that mentality and put more of a strategic plan in place where we can start tackling some of these sites and go after the hard things and get actual mission work accomplished. She's also looking at different contracting strategies. You know, right now at our site we have an M&O, but she's and a number of other sites do too. But she wants more of a closure mentality contract where we can incentivize contractors to, here's the scope of work, here's the budget. Now you go finish it by this date, and we'll incentivize you to do that. Before I came here, I worked at a project in Cincinnati called the Fernald Project. I'm not sure if you guys ever heard of that. It's a uranium processing plant. And Rocky Flats had this very similar type contract. Now, those two contracts where the contractor was incentive, given the scope of work, now go do your job, go clean it up, and we'll incentivize you for cleaning it up at a certain date. That's the kind of mentality that Ann wants to get to in the EM mission. So it's very welcoming to the sites to have that kind of strategic vision that EM is looking at. So more to come on that. We don't know where it's all going to shake out. It could hurt us. It could help us. If they see that we're a site that could accelerate a bunch of work, maybe it'll result in more funding. But if it's seen that other sites have a better chance of completing scope before we do, maybe they'll take some of our money and give it to those sites. So we don't know how we're going to fall out with all this. But the good news is that, you know, we're putting together a plan across the EM complex to get to more of a closure mentality. So. Last thing I have on my list is military training. As you all know, we do military training at the site. Just recently, we signed a land permit to give 750 acres, give access to 750 acres to the South Carolina National Guard. They have a plan to put together a complex on site that would be accessed off of 125, where they could put barracks and maintenance sheds and auditoriums and a cafeteria and anything that you would need to bring 1,000 soldiers into this site to start doing training. So that's a potential new mission here for the site, new land use for the site, which we think would be good. There's a lot of land at our site that's not being used right now that our soldiers could use for training. We've done a lot of some training with the South Carolina National Guard, where they've come in and, like, their civil unit has come in and instead of, they got to do 2 weeks of training a year, and instead of coming in and with the backhoe or going to a field somewhere, and digging up some dirt and filling in the hole again, they're actually coming out to our site for those 2 weeks and doing real work. So that's we anticipate a lot more of that as the National Guard becomes more of a permanent resident on site, and so we're looking forward to that. So in the process of that, so we have that 750 acres. We're also in the process of getting what they call a license to use 150,000 acres of land across the Savannah River site that they can do training on. So they want to be able to fly in helicopters and drive to places and do, play Army out in the woods, and what a better place to do it than the Savannah River site. We have some old industrial buildings in D area, the D coal powerhouse. They've already done training in that, but what a better way to train soldiers to on a real industrial facility than so that's so we're in the process of getting that 150,000 acre license to the National Guard. I reviewed the license for that today, and the next process will be going through all the legal reviews of that. So hopefully within the next couple of months we'll have that in place. Now, it's great to have all the licenses. Any questions?
Go around the table. Anyone here? Bobby?
Bobby Williams, CAP. Lots of good information, John. One thing I'd like to say, I'm happy to see that you got funding for the EOC. I worked in there for 25 years.
Oh, you did?
So I know how musky, molding and everything else it is. It needs to be D&D torn down. But that's good news. And you said it's going to be located E area next to SRNL? Is that
A area.
A area.
Yes. Oh, sorry. A area. I may have said E.
E area. You said E area. I'm like, E area next to SRNL. Next to SRNL, where? On the north side of SRNL?
Yeah, I believe there's a big parking lot out in front of SRNL off of Road 1. So I believe it'll be located somewhere off of that parking lot in near SRNL there, in a clean area. They just got to relocate a fence.
And another question, if the South Carolina National Guard gets funding from the state or whoever they get funding from, who is that development going to belong to? Department of Energy or South Carolina?
No, it will belong to the South Carolina National Guard. We will not own any of it. We're just leasing the property to them. Any improvements they make to that property, they own it.
Okay.
So, and then the lease that we've signed with them that says, they can buy utilities and everything from the site, but then they'll be responsible. If they decide to pick up and leave, they'll be responsible for getting rid of all those buildings.
Okay.
So EM is not taking on any additional liability by them being there.
And tell me a little about the A area firewater system.
So, Area Firewater is a project that it's a replacement of firewater tank that feeds the firewater system for SRNL. And there was a tank that was there, existing there, that was rusted and wore out, and it didn't pass. There was a lot of safety concerns. DNFSB come in, Defense Nuclear Safety Board come in and said, look, you guys got to replace it. This is a critical system for SRNL. You need to come in and replace that tank. And so that's what we're doing.
So that's the tank right down from the fire department across.
I believe that's where it is. I don't know if, Michael, do you know where that tank is? But I'm not exactly sure where it is.
Mike McLean's DOE. Yes, it's right down the road a little bit further into the site from where it's on the same side of the road as the firehouse is, but it's down closer to the old power plant that was there.
Okay.
Narendra, I think it's close to the new biomass steam generating
Right
plant.
across from it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, a little farther in.
And Dave Bender, the guy that was here before us, in infrastructure, he's the federal project director on the area firewater.
Okay. And kudos to Congress for approving the PILT. I live in Barnwell County, so that's good. I think that's all I have.
Okay, we're going to go around the table. So, Tom?
Dave Vavagas, CAB. John, thank you. Very comprehensive report. Let me work backwards for some of the things you said. I've got a lot of questions, but I'll stick to James's two-question rule for now. The strategic plan that you talked about that environmental management wants to produce, I looked, I think, last week. The DOE strategic plan still is not out there. It's long overdue. It should have been out, I think, back in February or so. And have you heard any updates on that?
No, I haven't. And I don't know that Ann's going to wait for it. So
Okay.
she's charging ahead with her mission, so she's going to put together her own strategic plan.
Okay. You talked about the FY20 target. What's the guidance from OMB on FY20?
What's the guidance as
Right.
far as what? As far as
Well,
how much the budget is?
Yeah, so
Well,
far as, is there, yeah, I mean, are there sensitivities? Or
Yes, it's embargoed. I can't talk about 20.
well, but they put their letter out talking about the guidance, right? They put that out on the OMB website? It's not
on,
out there?
Not
Okay.
on 20.
I'll have to look.
Everything for 20 is as far there shouldn't be any numbers out there.
Okay.
Now it's interesting. I saw an article today that I read on the news is that President Trump asked all of his cabinets to reduce their budgets by 5% for fiscal year 20.
Right, okay.
So so I suspect that the target that we've received is going to be lowered due to this 5% requirement.
Okay. All right.
All right, so a quick one from me as we roll around the table here. Just a curiosity, you talked about the 150,000 acres for military training and the industrial sites that they've had engagement type training at those different facilities that are closed down. Do we do that with local law enforcement as well?
I don't know. We don't know. I don't know. I know local law enforcement has used our ATA facility for competitions, shooting competitions, but they don't do any training on site as far as I know.
Okay.
Michael, unless you know.
So I know they
No.
do that actually do it at our plant. So I was just wondering if they did it on a bigger scale.
No, they don't.
Okay. So going down the line, Mary?
Mary Weber Cab, thank you. That was very informative. I have a question about your wish list concerning EM, and you mentioned something on your wish list about NNSA taking over as landlord. Can you explain why that would be desirable, or how that would affect closure?
Well, that's just one of many scenarios that are being looked at right now. As far as even contracting strategies, and you guys, there was a letter that the NA1, who's the head of NNSA, wrote to the site to ask the site to look at 3 different scenarios. And one of those scenarios is for NNSA to become the landlord of the site and take over SRNL. So one of the reasons why we may want to look at that, because who has the enduring mission at the site? NNSA. They have the tritium mission, okay, and now we're also looking at a scenario of possibly doing pit production at the site. So they're going to have this long-term enduring mission at the site, where EM has a mission of going out of business. So in a lot of ways it makes sense for NNSA to take over as landlord and let EM focus on our mission of cleaning up the site. So that's one of the scenarios that are being looked at right now.
Okay, it just seems that they are in some ways in conflict, because NNSA, yes, as you said, has a long-range plan for use of the facilities, but cleanup is not one of them. So it just seems like there's a conflict there, or not. Am I not understanding
I don't think so. No, because what would happen is NNSA would become the landlord for the site. They would own the site. Okay, like right now, EM owns the site, and NNSA is a tenant at the site. So it just kind of switches hats, where NNSA owns the site, and EM would be a tenant, and then we would just focus on our mission instead of having to. We would still pay into fixing roads and roofs and all that, but NNSA would manage that scope and not EM.
So Mike McLean, DOE. Mary, maybe this will help clear it up a little bit. This is not uncommon at other DOE sites. For example, Oak Ridge, the Office of Science is the landlord for that. EM still performs the same cleanup functions. It's just that the Office of Science runs the landlord functions of the site, the maintain the infrastructure, the roads, steam, electrical, et cetera, like that. Likewise, Idaho Office of Nuclear Energy is the landlord for that particular site, but EM is a tenant doing some of the cleanup. NNSA is the landlord for Los Alamos, and EM has a cleanup mission there, and they're a subsidy, but NNSA runs the site per se. It would be what Lisa Gordon Haggerty, NA1, proposed or attest NNSA to do the local field office was to do a study of what are the benefits and the downsides to different strategies for how NNSA would conduct its mission in the future, one of which was taking over as landlord functions. They would not do the cleanup mission. EM would still be here doing the cleanup mission, but some of the things that DOE EM does currently right now, like infrastructure, possibly some of the functions that my organization does, which is the operation of the canyon and the spent fuels and CARE, et cetera. Some of those are all on the table for NNSA. The NNSA is studying all of those to see what's the best way from their perspective to be able to manage their functions and should they take over as landlord.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that they wouldn't be taking over the cleanup operations.
No, ma'am,
Okay.
that is still an
All right,
environmental
that
management
clears
function.
that up, thank you.
Doug Howard, Cap. John, you mentioned the Argus system. Can you refresh my memory on that?
Michael, you probably know more than I do about Argus.
Sure. Mike McLean, DOE. Argus is in our secure areas. We have, for me to get into where I work, I have to present a card, electronic system that logs me in and logs me out. It's an accountability system. It's also verifying that I've got the credentials to be able to go in there. It's a very old, antiquated system. The hardware to make that electronic system work is difficult to near impossible to find extra parts for, so we've been scavenging the system, including the little cards that I have to present to show that I have the right credentials to get in there. And I'm not talking like a badge or anything like that. It's a blank card, but it's read electronically. Argus is a newer, updated system. I forget what the exact system was that's currently in place, but it's a more modern one where you can get replacement parts. It's faster, it's better, it's cheaper. It's the thing to do in the future. But it's basically just a facility access system, if you will.
And John, I have one more question. This is a contingency question, and hopefully it's not a classified question. If with the National Guard, setting up billeting and stuff like that here on the site, would they be used in contingency purposes if for some reason Centera would have to couldn't fulfill their mission or
No, there's no planning in place right now for this National Guard to be a contingency.
Okay.
So they're not bringing live weapons to the site to do training with. All the training they do with their using weapons or or laser or paintballs or that kind of stuff. But they're not bringing live weapons to the site. So no, they would not be used as a contingency if something happened to Centera. So now there's no planning in place for that. Now, if something ever did happen and we had a security incident, would they call in the National Guard for that? That's possible, but that's not one of the training missions that the National Guard is currently doing on our site.
Thank you.
Dave, I think you had more.
Dave Vavankas, Cab. John, you were talking about the $70 billion life cycle estimate. And I read in, I think it was the EM update, that Assistant Secretary White, Assistant Secretary, she stresses this completion mindset that you were talking about. So if you received the $70 billion appropriation over a certain number of years, how many years would it take to complete the mission here?
Well, right now we're out to 2065. Okay, that's what. And one of the things that's pushing it out to 2065, we could be done sooner if there was a repository in place. Right now, the assumption is the repository is not identified and built until 2048, and then after that period of time, I think we assumed we would not start shipping to the repository until 2055. All of our high-level waste canisters from liquid waste would have to go there. That's really what's pushing that date out. If we had a repository sooner, we could get out of the site a lot faster than 2065. But right now, we're not starting any major D&D in our life cycle until the liquid waste program's done. Once the liquid waste program's done, which is an $800 million a year program, Once that program's done, then we start going after D&D of the facilities on site.
Thanks. We've heard the infrastructure buzzword quite a bit, how important infrastructure is to the site. The Argus security system, $10 million of funding for that. The Emergency Operations Center, the $1.3 million for that. Both of those considered infrastructure?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then the other thing that I noticed when I was, and I went out.
So was the area firewater
Okay.
project I talked about
Okay.
earlier.
The other thing that I noticed when I was looking at the conference report, the increase, and this doesn't include the safeguards and security, but when I look at the appropriations that I see that are directly appropriated to each of the sites, I see a 5.7% increase FY19 over FY18 for Savannah River site. I only see, the next one is WIP. I see 5.4%. I see Oak Ridge at only 2.4%. I see Idaho National Lab at a negative 0.2%. I see the Office of River Protection at Hanford at a plus 0.8%. I think Savannah Riverside did pretty well when you look at it in terms of year over year, fiscal year over fiscal year.
We did.
Yeah.
We did do very well. We didn't do as well if you look at what we requested versus what we got. But you're right. An increase from 18 to 19 is 5. If that's what the number is, 5.7. That's a good increase.
But that, I mean, you know better than I do, I'm sure. But that request is a starting point for Congress, and I mean it gets stale. We know that Pam Marks had to go up and discuss with one of the staffs up there about one of the projects because things change. So and other things happen. So Congress has an opportunity to through testimony, through questions for the record, a number of other means to bring things up to speed, up to the current day, and they get it right in the end, hopefully.
Yeah. We go through each summer before Congress passes their final bill. We meet with we get a lot of questions from the congressional staffers from both the House and Senate Energy and Water committees. They're always asking us questions. What's the increase for? What would you do if we gave you more money for this? What's the impact if we take money from this? So we get a number of those questions as they're preparing their budgets. So you're right. The February budget is just the first shot across the bow. That's the president's suggestion. But it's really through those interactions that we have with the House and Energy staffers that really drive what the budgets are going to be.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any more questions for John?
Just one more.
Doug?
Doug Howard Cab. So from the what you just told us about Ann White and her 10-year strategic plan, we can say that infrastructure is one of her priorities.
Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
And that's part of our priorities too with accelerating work.
Exactly.
If we're gonna accelerate and get our mission done here, we need to have infrastructure dollars.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Okay. Moving right along. Actually, one more question, John. Is there anything you see lacking that you'd appreciate the cab to comment on? And we've kind of been pretty close at the hip in our annual letter and things of that nature, but
No, I think you guys are hitting home about focusing on the liquid waste mission and focusing on infrastructure. I think you made it very loud and clear that those are what your priorities are. I don't know. I think you guys do a pretty good job of letting us know how you feel and what your priorities are. So I don't know that I have any suggestions to that. Funding our program, funding it as requested. That's really, I know Gil's focused a lot on the kind of funding that we're getting. He's looking at what all the sites are getting And I know we talked about the increase from 18 to 19, but Gil was looking at all the sites' requests versus what they actually got. And if you look at that, sometimes we fall on the short end of the stick.
Everybody got more and we got actually less.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So, EM now, when I first started here, 5 years ago, it was a $5.7 billion program. We're at the $7 billion now. We're up to $7 billion we got in fiscal year 19. So the budgets are going up. Ours are going up too, but not as fast as everybody else's is going up. So, but there's a lot of, politics is politics, and there's a lot of that goes on with the congressman, and EM doesn't always get what they ask for because, once politics gets involved and the congressmen get involved, they're really the ones who decide what goes to each site. But we really need to start showing Congress, you're giving us $7 billion a year. We really need to start showing them results for that. So, and that's what Ann's focused on.
Thank you.
Dave Vavagascap. John, you said we're not going up as fast as everybody else is. I think we are going up faster than everybody
this fiscal year, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you look over the past, 5-6 years, we're not. And one of the reasons we're going up too is, remember, our pension's going up. So we're getting more money for our pension, but are we getting any more work done for that money? No. That's money that comes off the top before we get any money, any work done. And it's just going to get worse. We can go up, our pension next year I believe, goes up another, $50 million from what it was in 19. So you get no work done by $50 million in increase. That's just paying your bills.
Thanks again, John.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving on into committee discussion on the presentations that took place at the full board meeting last month. We have first up the SRNL update and funding presentation. I had reviewed these earlier in the week and I had no notes that were not answered or addressed in the full cap. So does anyone else have some input to that presentation? So some of the discussion, just refresh our memories in case if a question was lingering out there. We had talked extensively on the pause and how that the recent incentive award was reduced incrementally based on some of that impact of that, or will be, should I say, more than likely, because they the supplier basically did not deliver. I don't think that was not on this subject one.
Yeah, I think you're talking about SWPF.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. See, I should have went to all the committee meetings this week, but we didn't have them yesterday too.
If you do have any questions or comments that are lingering from the full board, while Dr. Majidi couldn't be here today, Paul Irwin from SRNL is here, and if he doesn't know the answer to your questions directly, he does know who to ask. So please let loose if you do have anything.
Go ahead, Dave.
And John, I'm sorry to, Dave Vavagascab, I'm sorry to keep bugging you with questions, but I know that Savannah River National Lab doesn't receive a direct appropriation from Congress, correct?
That's correct.
And all of their funding comes from contracts and grants, is that
No, not necessarily. I mean, their funding, we define contracts and grants. I mean, DOE funds SRNS, who operates SRNL, so that's a contract. But they get their funding from multiple different sources. So the maintenance and operations budget, which is about $55 to $60 million a year, that's paid for through the site indirects. Okay, so anybody who uses SRNS labor for any project is paying a piece of SRNL. Then each PBS on site, so if PBS 11, Michael wants to use the lab to do some work for nuclear materials scope, he's got money in his PBS that he gives to SRNL to do the scope that he wants. You know, they get money from Homeland Security, they get money from FBI, they get money from other sites, they get money from other countries. You know, Japan is funding some work there. So, and they also get grants as well.
So some of the other sites with labs, they do get direct appropriations from Congress.
That is correct.
Why is SRNL different?
I don't know the history on that. I know there's been some talk about getting a separate funding source for SRNL. We've put together some scenarios with that. Part of the problem is with going to a single funding source is right now NNSA is paying about 25% of the lab. Okay, so if EM would create a separate funding source for the lab, then there's the potential that EM is now paying 100% of the lab instead of 75% of the lab. So, so that's one of the reasons that there hasn't been a lot of energy on EM's part of funding the lab separately. So, you know, in a lot of labs, the lab is the site. You know, that's why they have a direct appropriation, but ours is just funded a little bit different.
Okay, thank you.
So one other subject out of the SRNL presentation, actually it's more reiteration because it's always been a contention with the CAB and with some of our public commenters, and that was that the German fuel spheres, the research and development and the technology that was developed to possibly process that in the future, that was in fact paid 100% by Germany, correct?
That is correct.
We can all appreciate that. Anyone else have any comments on that particular presentation? Okay, let's move on to the Community Reuse Organization, our annual update there. Anyone scope out governmentdeals.com? govdeals.com. Actually, I did during the meeting, but they had trucks for sale. I also had nothing of major that we didn't discuss in the meeting, so around the table, everyone take a moment to refresh, maybe skim through the material if something comes to mind, otherwise we'll move right along. Just going to ask if either of the presenters were here in case there was things that they were seeking advice on that we may have missed. You're it, John. None? No? Very good. Okay, our work plan for kind of an annual summary. It's our Super Bowl, so to speak, but no, it's more like our final exam for the site. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see how the site has performed in the last fiscal year, and also the National Environmental Research Park. Honestly, I don't remember the background on that one.
Dr. Rhodes will be giving that presentation.
Awesome. He's always very eloquent. So, so we look forward to that. Do we have any open or draft recommendations? I do not believe we do.
I believe so.
Can we talk a little bit about the performance metrics a little bit? I saw your email. And
Sure.
And it doesn't appear that we're hitting the mark with the performance metrics we're supplying, and I'm kind of wondering what are you looking for? And I looked through the current performance metrics, and I looked at our missions across what we do in EM, and I look at what we gave you, and I'm not sure I know where else to go from where we gave you. What we
Right,
gave you.
right. So there's been discussion in the past, a lot of it coming from myself. So that being said, one of the dreams, so to speak, is that the CAB has presented something similar to a dashboard format where we can see the active progress, where we're heading, perhaps the milestones, the next peaks to climb towards. So we'll pick on liquid waste. So we've got, 35 million gallons to go. It would be, in my opinion, during those types of updates that we have a very good idea as to how much we've accomplished, how much we've yet to go, what's the next major hurdle. If we look at the broad scheme of tanks, how many here could tell you how many tanks were being worked on at any given point for closure? Probably none of us. And obviously that's another committee's purview, but as in general, the CAB in whole doesn't always get a holistic picture of the way things are going. So if I remember correctly, some of the data that was reported was fantastic data. Don't get and say, are we doing a good job? I believe you are. I think we could also, in that regard, if we have more of that story in a visual, more people would understand how well we actually are doing at our site. And I think that goes a long way to ease the local public's concerns, the environmentalists' concerns, and as a taxpayer, the fiscal concerns that the $7 billion is in fact being spent in something very productive. And since we already have this closure mindset, I think in the last email on that topic, I had maybe suggested a bar graph showing as the liquid waste goes down, maybe a chart that shows here's what we reported last year, that this is the curve, that liquid waste is coming down on this slope. We're introducing liquid waste on this upward slope, and then here's where it all starts coming down again. And without something like that, we have the end closure date of 2065, and I think you could ask all of us privately if we think we'll hit that date, and most of us will always say we either know, because
Okay.
so that's kind of the background of it, and so we get a lot of paragraphical information from a lot of updates, which is extremely difficult for the average person to put any context to. So for instance, you gave us a wealth of information this evening, and we're all frantically taking notes and try to ask intelligent questions of it. How that actually plays into the broad scheme of what's going on would be an awesome context to have it all in. And that's, it's a little bit difficult for you folks to kind of convey a picture that you can release to us. We understand that. We've talked about the whole, what poor James has to go through to get anything released to us in print. and I understand that. And, we've offered up suggestions that maybe it's a relatively blank PowerPoint with what he's about to say, and we can fill in the numbers, because some of it, I'm not a nuclear physicist, I'm not an engineer.
Are we still going through OMB when we're submitting presentations to the outside public? Because I know in the past, you've asked for presentations on the life cycle, and OMB has said, no, we're not releasing that information. So
If they are still looking at it, if they're part of the headquarters review process, they haven't made any comments, I'd say, in the past fiscal year.
all I know is our OMB examiner is very reluctant to release detailed information about what our plan is between now and 2065. So I hear your frustration, but for some reason the OMB examiner just doesn't want those details released. So he wants you getting information from official means, the president's budget, the bills that are passed. That's how he wants you to get information about the Savannah River site and the progress that's being made there. And what the liabilities are associated with cleaning up the site. He probably wouldn't have been happy me telling you that it's $70 billion.
With all that being said, Dan has sent a few emails over the past few years with different examples of what he's looking at.
Okay.
And so I'll pull those together and I'll send those to you so that you can have another idea of what he's talking about.
Okay.
Right, and some of it, it's really showing what progress is. And it's, you know, we put DHEC on the stand, so to speak, at the last CAB meeting, and they're pleased as punch. But sometimes this isn't vocalized to the local community, because we've got members on this board that are extremely skeptical of anything they're hearing out of DOE. And hopefully those same people have some respect for some of the overseers that, like DHEC and EPA, that I'll say it every chance I get. Every time I go out to the site, I am duly impressed with what you folks are doing. And I feel that part of what this committee can do is help you get that story out there. And if I could, maybe I have to put it in a formal recommendation so that someone has to be answerable to this, but if we had data like showing here's the current plan with current funding projections, and we as CAB members, as we hang out here for 6 years, hopefully, we look at that trend, and how many times does that curve get pushed the wrong way? You know, we now have SWPF delays. All right, what's that really do for us? I'm not entirely sure. Broad scheme of things, once it's up and running, everything should get back on track. But does it? And that's where some of the holistic view really comes in handy for people to say, aha, you know, so we're building up to this, getting this huge momentum going. Right. And then, you know, it's going to be really interesting, and I feel we're supporting you in one sense because we see that building, and now we have the general consensus of across every committee that infrastructure is highly important to achieve and sustain that momentum once it's here, because once that's running and you have other things that are lagging behind, you just have another bottleneck.
Right.
And we just whizzed away hundreds of millions of dollars on the wrong bottleneck, right?
Right. Yeah, in part of our so we do need to do a better job of communicating the progress that we're making. So I don't disagree with you there. One of the obstacles we have is, you know, for those of you that sit in the main CAB meetings, when I go through and I talk about our budget and men safe, you know, almost 80% of our budget is men safe. Okay, that's just coming in, turning the lights on, you know, everything the landlord needs to do to keep the city of Savannah River site open. You know, and there's very little money available to us for making progress. And what adds to that problem is we have different missions at our site. We got a nuclear materials mission, we got a liquid waste mission, we have a D&D mission. So all of those missions are all competing for the same dollar. So we're making incremental progress on each one of those missions, but we're not making great strides in any of them. Now, right now, the liquid waste program is our #1 mission. Okay, and if you look at the increase in this year in liquid waste, did we get what we wanted? No, but we did get an increase. Pam Marks went up to Congress and asked for more money to complete SWPF, and we got it. So, you know, once that program is up and running and SWPF is running like we're supposed to, you are going to see greater progress, incremental or more than incremental progress on a project than what you're seeing right now. Right now, we're just trickling along liquid waste.
Dave Levox, the other thing that makes this problematic is that all your funding is annual. So you don't know what you're going to get, you know, 2, 3, 4 years down the road.
You have no idea how much that holds us back from getting work done. When you don't get funding till halfway through the year, okay, I can't go out and hire people that I need because I don't know whether I'm going to get the funding for that or not. I can't start a new project because I don't know whether I'm going to get first of all, if it's a line item, Congress won't let me start it because they have to approve all new starts. but I want to award a contract. I can't award a contract because I don't know what kind of funding I'm going to get. So it makes life very, very difficult for us not knowing what we're going to get. And we're pretty used to, we get a president's budget and we always get something lower than that. So we're pretty used to planning for less than what we're what we asked for, because that's what we've expected, or that's what's happened over the years. Some of the other sites, they can't spend the money they're getting because they're getting more than what's in their request. So, but you're right, Dave, that does inhibit us from getting work done, is not knowing what we're going to get on an annual basis.
Go ahead, Doug.
Doug Howard Cab. Well, John, with this talk being going on, do you think what Ann White is talking about with her strategic planning and closure being one of her priorities is going to help with this, with the closure and the budgets, the money being given that we need to have?
I certainly hope so. The encouraging thing is it's different. It's a new way of doing business for EM because we haven't operated that way, where we've established priorities across the complex. So will it materialize when the funding comes out with Congress? I don't know, but I do think it's a step in the right direction where when Ann's sitting down and testifying in front of Congress, she can actually show that she has a plan in place for getting work done across the EM complex. And there's going to be winners and losers when it comes to that, because there's only a certain amount of money. But with that closure mentality, I think we're going to be able to make some progress across the EM. We just don't know who the winners and losers are going to be.
Make one, I'll give it to you. Or you want it, please?
David Boxcap. John, also, once the EM strategic plan is released, is SRS still planning to release its own strategic plan?
Yes.
And
Yes, our strategic plan should be in line with the strategic plan that comes out from EM.
And one would think that the EM strategic plan should be aligned with the Department of Energy strategic plan.
You would think.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how soon after the EM plan is released will the SRS plan be released? Do you know?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
It shouldn't take us too long to update it. So we already have one. We did 2-3 years, probably 3 years ago when Rich Olson was here. He updated it, and it hasn't been. It's sitting there on a shelf waiting to be updated for whatever the new plan is.
Okay. So John, Dan Kaminsky Cab. You stated, and we all know this, and by the way, in years past, you've done an excellent job of educating all of us, and I think we came to that same realization as a full cab a year or two ago with regards to the difficulties of the continuing resolutions, lack of annualized funding, and even if you got your wish and got a year's budget, you're still constrained because of planning issues. We understand that as a board in general. And we even the people who understand it, we need to hear it, because we've got new members, and nobody gets anything the first time they hear it.
Right.
Often. So thank you for bringing that illustration up. One thing that I sort of always equated this to, EM is we want to go out of business type mission, right?
Yes.
As soon as we're clean, we're done, right?
Yes.
So it's quite similar to trying to get out of debt. We have a debt. We have a dirty site. Our goal is get out of debt, and then we can move on our merry way and do other things, right? So one of the strategic ways to get out of debt is you have many missions, you have many accounts that you owe money on, and logic would have you just slowly pay all of them down, right? Well, there's other philosophies out there that actually work, that instead of paying little on all, you focus your monies on the smallest ones and pay them completely off and move up to the next and to the next and to the next. And the good factor of that is that, and so any of you who happen to be in debt, you might want to listen closely. The good thing about it is you see progress. So if we did that as EM, we see progress. We get exactly what EM1 wants, is closure. We're closing smaller bits and pieces and moving up to the big stuff. The problem is where the money goes is the politics and the jobs aspect. None of us really want to impact local economies in any negative fashion, but let's face it, once EM is done, they're done. And all those nice jobs need to reassimilate into something else productive. And so do you happen to know, or is this a strategy that is possibly being considered with this long-term strategy that EM1's looking for, that we do a blitz on the smaller closure items so that we can show that progress?
I don't know specifics of what Ann's looking for. I do know that she wants to get that closure mentality. I think that's the Dave Ramsey
Yep.
approach to
Absolutely.
EM is paying off the smallest one. Now, I worked at Fernald. Okay, it was a uranium processing plant that is a factory on 1,000 acres, and there were 2,000 people worked there. DOE funded it, and 2,000 people were out of job. EM's no longer there. That's the kind of mentality that Ann wants to get to. Okay, part of our problem here at our site is we have enduring missions. We have nuclear materials that's not going out of business for
And we'll
quite
need
some
EM
time.
at some point.
Yeah, liquid waste. That's a 10, 15-year program. So they're not going out of business in any period, short period of time. But you have sites like Moab, Moab, Utah. You got mill tailing sitting next to the Colorado River. All it is a dig and haul, dig and haul, dig and haul. We could very easily, EM could very easily finish that project in a much shorter period of time if they got another $10 million a year in funding. But instead, it's just being incrementally funded, and so what's happening is that project is being stretched out. That's the mentality that I think Ann is trying to change. We got to quit incrementally funding all these different programs and go after specific programs and then put contracts in place. She's not happy with our EM's contracting strategy at all. She wants to put contracts in place to incentivize contractors to get work done at a lower cost in a less period of time.
So discussion among the group. I sort of sense one recommendation could possibly be something along the Dave Ramsey approach to EM. But any thoughts, suggestions, questions? Quiet bunch. Did you guys not eat dinner? All right, well, I won't belabor the point, so thank you for the very excellent discussion tonight. I know you took some notes on some of the feedback with regards to KPIs and such, but
Dave Vavakas, Cab. How much low-hanging fruit, if you will, is there still out there? Or have you already addressed all of that?
No, we have a lot of low-hanging fruit. We have over 200 facilities that if we had the money, we can go after in D&D. Some of them are small, but we have F Canyon. F Canyon's been shut down for a number of years. Okay, you know how much money we spend doing surveillance and maintenance on F Canyon? So C reactor.
actually, I don't. How much?
Probably, what is it, Michael, about $10 million a year on F Canyon?
But what would it take to close it?
Millions.
Like how many?
Millions. First of all, you got to
Tens.
deactivate the facility. You got to flush the facility, get all the hold-up material out. You're probably talking. Look at P&R reactor. Or P reactor was about $80 million to shut down P reactor. Okay, I think the canyons would probably be a little bit more difficult than the reactors, just because of what they did in there. So you're talking over $100 million, I bet you, to shut down F Canyon.
So Mike Michelanis, DOE, there is still, without getting into the details of what we put forth to Ann to consider for a strategic plan, there is still some low-hanging fruit facilities that within my PBS areas we propose that are feasible to be taken on within a 10-year period. There are just funding challenges to go make that happen. So the other dimension that I don't think you've touched on, though, in the discussion, Dave, is that and this isn't politics as much as risk. a lot of the if we went after nothing but the low-hanging fruit, I doubt that the state of South Carolina would be very happy with the Department of Energy, because the tanks aren't low-hanging fruit. And the department and the state of South Carolina and EPA consider the tank waste to be the largest threat in the state. So yes, I hear what you're saying, but I think what Ann is doing in the strategy, at least as far as what I understood and what I communicated to my contractor and my staff to prepare for the input for my scope of work into that plan, was go after the low-hanging fruit and try and find some of those things that will demonstrate progress, not just incremental progress, but significant progress in moving a facility out of the maintenance and surveillance mode, let's say, and into D&D discussions. And that process takes several years by itself. Once you take it out of my inventory as an operating facility and move it over into D&D, then you're into, EPA, the state, and the department doing risk studies, looking at what we should do, how do we go close. Then you put an interim ROD in place to say, okay, this is documenting the decision how we're going to do it, and then boom, you start moving forward on it. She wants some of those things to go, okay, well, what can I work on and what can I put in that process? So while the tanks will still remain a high priority, because there's general agreement, unanimous agreement that is a high priority, will remain one, I think she's challenging the sites to go say, okay, put something up. Because when we put things forward, and if she starts, we've got conceptual ideas up there, if she starts liking some of those, okay, I want to hear a little bit more about this, I want to hear a little more about this, I guarantee you, when we start putting in details in that and start firming them up, if anything under my area gets picked, I'm going to be held accountable for making that progress. And I'll be looking for another job if I don't, if I don't meet those expectations. Because at my level, when you have performance expectations set forth, you don't meet one of those expectations and you're unsat. So that's what she's putting. That's her paradigm shift. And she's got contracting ideas on how to go make that happen. But first, she's got to get the ideas in place as to where does she put her attention. So that's what she's doing. That was a really good discussion, John. I think you led a great one.
Doug Howard, Cap. I might have missed it because I went to the restroom, but just hypothetically, John, if say Congress were to give you the $70 billion right now, it would still take to 2065 to get the job done?
Well, remember what I said earlier, one of the drivers that's pushing that out is the repository. So if we were able to bring the repository back in, let's say 10 years from now we had a repository, instead of 2048, it's 2035, we could probably carve 10 to 15 years off of the life cycle just by bringing that repository in. So, once the nuclear materials is gone, once the liquid waste gone, the only mission left is to do D&D. So could we significantly clean up the site and do the D&D in the soil prior to 2065? Absolutely. If we had the funding to do it, we absolutely could bring that date in.
Okay. No other discussion? All right, let's move into public comment. Anyone online, James? Okay, hearing none. I think I have formulated a recommendation that I'll be piecing together for our next meeting. And fortunately, we've had this discussion soon enough, because a lot of the fiscal stuff starts hitting January with our IPL.
Yep.
And it's going to be an interesting year.
Yep.
So if Gil were here, he would say he absolutely loves you when you're speaking to us. He says it all the time, because there's such a wealth of information in the numbers that there's a story to be told, and there's a lot of good things, and we can't do any of it without money.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that Congress has asked us, do we want a separate funding source for pension? Instead of paying pension the way we do now, it's kind of an overhead, it's spread out to everybody. Do you want to, what are the impacts of having a separate funding source? In a way, that would be good, because it would bring focus to the pension, and it wouldn't be competing with everything else. Congress would be able to fund it. However, the problem is the way, because of these continuing resolutions and because our pension goes up. So let's say next year my pension goes up $50 million. If I'm under a continuing resolution, I'm stuck at last year's funding level for funding pension. guess what? I can't make my pension payments because Congress hasn't given, I'm still under a CR and they can't give, so that way I could possibly default on the pension by not being able to make the pension payments that are required. So that's one of the reasons that we're saying, yeah, it's great that you're talking about pension, but having a separate funding source, we don't believe is the right answer.
So, but that separate funding source would still be within EM
Oh, yeah.
or
Oh, yeah.
outside?
Yes.
EM,
Yeah.
okay. Understood. All right. If there's nothing else, this meeting is adjourned.